Welcome to this week's Two Men in the Middle. This is where a bunch of men in the middle of the country get together and talk about politics, current events, and other fun stuff. I am Craig Huey.
I'm Brandon Koenig.
Oh, I'm Mike McCammon.
And I'm Jason Peterson.
We didn't rehearse it. It's actually four men in the middle, isn't it, today?
We're like a gang.
Yeah, exactly. A gang.
We got our hand gestures here, guys.
There's some horrible motorcycle movie called Biker Boys with Lawrence Fishburne. Remember this from the late 90s? Terrible film. But there's a line in it where they're forming a new motorcycle gang, and he says it takes 3 to make a gang. So we have enough people for a gang.
See, we've almost violated my 2 pizza rule, which means you should never have a gathering of more people that cannot be fed by 2 large pizzas, just so you know.
But Mike, that's the rule. I think that the second half of that statement is if you want to get anything done.
Well, and an hour from now, we'll know the answer to that question, won't we?
Yeah, we're really not looking to get anything done, seriously. So
We're really looking to complain about what's not getting done.
Yeah. You can fit way more than 2 people on feeding pizza if you're just complaining about stuff.
Well, okay, that's fair.
So we're all here tonight because President Trump is out of the White House. The Trump administration, the Trump presidency has come to an end. Mike and I started this podcast during Trump's first year in office simply because we were confused as hell. Mike and I, we were working together at the time, and we'd always talk politics. And I think that first year of Trump's presidency, it always came back down to the same thing. Hey, we're 2 middle-aged guys who spent a lot of our lives and invested a lot of our time trying to understand politics, and we're completely lost. We just don't know what's happening. And the best way we thought to deal with that was try to talk it out for an hour each week.
Yeah, well, and I remember staring at your cube thinking, doing a podcast shouldn't be that hard. We were already spending an hour over lunch talking about it. We might as well go ahead and record it. So I went home and stood up a WordPress site, and I had done some podcasting before, and it's actually not very hard to do. It's actually quite simple. So that was and then when I was running for office, I realized that I was laying down a little bit too much material competition research, so I decided to bail on the pod for a while. And actually what happened, I don't know if I ever told you this story, Craig, but one of the other candidates came up to me at one of the, like every week, there's always like these little Democrat, breakfasts and stuff like that. And, you always go to all of them when you're running for office. And I was at one, and one of the other candidates came up to me and kind of confronted me about a comment I made about his campaign in this podcast. So that's when I kind of said, probably ought to not be podcasting because my competitors are listening. And of course, this is unscripted, so God knows what I would say that could get me in trouble.
You called him a Bernie bro. It wasn't.
That's what I called him.
Really? It's not like you use 4-letter words.
That's why would Brent Wilder be listening to our podcast? That's what I don't understand. I
don't think you know this, but a lot of important people listen.
Well, I was going to say. The whole progressive movement. I hear AOC is on this list too. So.
Oh yeah, it's an underground phenomenon.
Just to start this whole thing off by complaining, one of the things that I do think is going to drive people crazy, and it is kind of a fun return to normal. Everyone's happy this week, but I'm very worried about missing the opportunity to take advantage of the Capitol riots to get more Republicans over to the other side. And one of the things that's blocking us today is this fucking Bernie meme that's like all over the web. Like it's like I know you've seen it, right? Where it's Bernie sitting with the mittens and everyone's putting him in pictures like sitting places. And it's just like, obviously the libs and all the, progressives think it's hilarious. And there's this cute old man and how did it come about? And I'm just like, I would bet that the moderates and the kind of light Republicans are like, come on, we're so tired of this guy. And then you've got the far rights that are like, he's a socialist. Like you really want to bury him from the narrative these days. I mean, do you have a reaction to Bernie Sanders, Craig, in his mittens?
I mean, I personally enjoy Bernie Sanders from an entertainment perspective.
As an entertainer, you're a big fan.
Yeah, he's an entertainer. I don't take anything he says politically seriously. This is a man who has spent his entire life in the Senate. Again, I can't think of a single significant piece of legislation he's ever passed. This is a guy who went, I think in the 80s, visited Moscow and gave a press conference about how beautiful the city was and how the trains ran on time. I just think Bernie Sanders is just a complete non-starter and just needs to go away.
So what about, Jason, do you have an opinion on the meme, or is it just harmless fun? Is that how you're looking at it?
I thought it was entertaining. I thought it was harmless fun. I think people are looking for something to laugh at and otherwise really serious.
Oh, okay. That's fair. Brandon, you're not even
yeah, that's how I feel as well. I felt like it was lighthearted, and we all needed something lighthearted after the events of the past year, let alone the last couple of weeks. And I don't know that, it brings Bernie front and center, but not in any, I think, positive way. I think more as a joke. I mean, it shows that all sides kind of see him as a joke, and he's being used as a tagline, and I'm sorry, not tagline, a punchline is what I meant to say. So it's, I don't think it gives him any credibility politically. So I don't think it really changes the calculus politically as far as policy goes.
If we could get Bernie Sanders and Paul Manafort together, because I think, Paul Manafort certainly dresses in a manner that projects who he is. So does Bernie Sanders. Maybe if those two could just exchange some basic clothing, Bernie could get one of those purple silk jackets and a nice tie. Maybe Paul could get a set of mittens that Bernie was wearing that were knitted for him by somebody from his home state. The one thing about Bernie Sanders, he gives no shits about his appearance, his branding, what he looks like, or what people think of his appearance. Now, in politics, that can be right or wrong, but he's had that opinion forever and he's not changing. So at least I have some respect for that.
A more fun pairing would be Roger Stone. I mean, because Roger Stone is kind of flamboyant and is, doesn't care what people think. So, put him and Bernie Sanders together.
I didn't mean to take us into that cul-de-sac, but it was in my newsfeed. I just happened to see it.
He's one of the 50, right? They need his vote. So it'll be interesting to see how they work with him over the coming week.
And isn't he going to chair the Labor Committee?
I thought it was budget.
Or the Budget Committee. That's right. That's going to be interesting to watch. So, Mike, let's talk a little bit more history of the pod before we get into people's reactions to the end of the Trump era. So the thing that I remember most about this podcast is we're sitting in your basement. We had this little microphone that, I'm still using, and we sat around a table for like 40 minutes, maybe recorded something, had no idea what it was, played it back. At least we could recognize our voices in the conversation, and that was good enough. And we kind of started from there. And then the three largest mass shootings in the United States happened, all within 60 days, 70 days of each other.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but yeah.
And the Me Too movement broke wide open. And I remember at one point in time, you looked at me and said, if I would have known that this is what we were going to have to talk about, this is significantly less fun than I thought.
Well, the shootings were awful.
Yeah.
And, interestingly, maybe not so interestingly, but, we recently moved to another part of Overland Park, and one of the walks I go on, which I did just today, as a matter of fact, I walked by a church where there was a candidate forum when I was on the trail, and that was the one that was sponsored by the I can't remember. There was a kid group. There was a teenage kids against gun violence. I can't remember what it was called off the top of my head. I could probably remember if I thought about it long enough. But I was walking by that church, just today, and I was thinking, now that the Democrats have both houses and they have the presidency, I'm sure we're going to see lots of great movement on the gun debate now. Correct?
No. The gun debate's been settled. It was settled at Sandy Hook. There's no need to talk about it anymore.
Yeah, it's and I was mindful, because I thought the same thing. I was mindful. I have a good friend from a previous job that he was very cynical, and he always felt that the parties weren't really different, that really it was just theater. And he always used Guantanamo Bay as his example. But I think you could also use, the gun violence for the same thing. In other words, things don't move as much as you think they should. Now, I think there's going to be a lot of things are going to change. Or at least I can sleep at night. I don't feel like I got to check the news every morning to see what shit show just happened overnight. It's also hasn't it been weird to not like, what did Trump tweet yesterday? Like, it's just like, it's really weird because does he have his Twitter account back? I haven't been following.
No, it has. But Mike, I want to talk about, we're talking about the history of the pod. Stop cul-de-sacking around.
Hey, let's look forward. Let's look forward. Stop looking back.
You've got to do this more so you can get back into practice. What I was going to say is people didn't see you during the time you were running for office and how physically demanding that was.
That's crazy.
You were literally working 24 hours a day. And I wish somehow we could have got like a reality show of just followed you around so people could see that when you're trying to be kind of an upstart candidate and you're trying to bootstrap it together, it's not a mountain you're climbing. It's like 3 mountains stacked on top of each other you're trying to climb.
And I mean, you exaggerate somewhat, but it was 18 to 20 hour days. And it was not 24, but it was definitely 18 to 20. Now, I was kind of a fool because, I started the campaign. I decided not to fundraise because I thought money is one of the bad things about politics. And so I'm not going to do it. And so I didn't have a big staff of people and all that kind of stuff that, serious candidates have. So it kind of made my own nightmare, if that makes any sense. I mean, we still did really well, in terms of, the ROI, but that's not how they measure, candidates. They measure by how many votes they get, no matter the ROI. So. What was that, Jason?
Would you consider running again?
I would. My wife won't let me. I thought about. This will get back to me. I did think about. I was thinking about it this last go around. I think every candidate should have to go through a primary because I think the voters deserve. Oh, Craig's shaking his head no. I think the voters deserve to kind of hear where somebody is and kind of force them to get back out in front of the public, because I think it's very easy for once someone gets in office to be, really manage those moments in a way that kind of creates a very false narrative. And so now, of course, that's people want to kill you if you primary your own candidate in your own party. In fact, I've been thinking about it a lot lately in my current work, and it was really fun. I mean, I was killing myself, but it was fun. And I got to meet so many great people. I got to learn about the district. I learned all the issues, all that stuff. But my wife's not a big fan of it.
Understandable.
But Mike, isn't that like part of the problem though? Even in the primaries, you run into that issue where, especially the candidates that are well funded, are managed, and their responses are, I think scripted. And I'm sure you saw that because that's what distinguished you, is that you were this more natural candidate. You said what you thought, what you believed, but yet your opponents. And particularly the person who ended up winning, it was a very different. I mean, they did not have that kind of just open, freewheeling, here's what I think and believe on the issues. And so that's the challenge, is that you have these candidates that are kind of prepackaged and then they get rewarded for it, right? I mean, they're able to win because they have the momentum and money.
Yeah, people, I mean, I think they're a small, I mean, I'm a big fan of the 80-20 rule. I think 20% of the voters want authenticity in their candidates, like a real person that can talk to, that they feel like can connect and has life experiences to reflect on when new decisions come before them, that kind of a thing. And then 80% of the other people, they don't really care. They kind of look at, they're kind of the drive-by voter. They basically kind of show up a week before, kind of take a look around, and based upon what they see on television or whatever, they make a decision and they don't do any further exploration. So, but I mean, the only alternative to the system is to, take all the money out. That would be kind of the first thing, because that would really change things drastically. And then I don't know what the right solution is. I mean, I've thought about it, not much lately, but money is the problem. So, you guys have heard this before, but the winning candidate spent about $1.4 million in a primary in the state of Kansas, for God's sake. We spent $47,000, which is nothing. Now we got pummeled. It's just the way it goes.
Well, a couple of things. Mike, you referred to me and you said I like to exaggerate. In the pod business, we call that storytelling. Thank you.
Okay.
And secondly, the primary system sucks. The primary system is how we got Rick Santorum and Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Donald Trump.
All the primary system is
and
doing
Lauren
is making sure.
Boebert, whatever her name, from Colorado, she won her primary. Don't we really need like those? And I don't. Are they called jungle primaries, like what Georgia and California and open primaries, and where everybody runs in one primary, and then the top two advance to the general, regardless of party? Like that's something that would at least more equalize the.
Yeah, I would. Well, it still doesn't remove money from it.
No, yeah.
But it does force everyone to talk to all the voters, as opposed to just kind of going after kind of a small segment. In fact, you could argue in that case, it might actually work against you from the money point of view, because when we were in the primary, like we used text messaging, well, we focused only on Democrats because we didn't want to spend money to send messages to people that were not going to vote in our primary. So it actually could work against you that way. But yeah, the one design I've heard around is called the Final Five concept. So you'd have an open primary, and then the top five with ranked choice voting would get into the final. And then that way, you'd have a fairly good mix of people to pick from. And with ranked choice voting, it would force, you'd be able to waste your vote on that second place candidate that otherwise you would not vote for in a regular election. Yes, Jason.
I think this part is really worth spending a minute on, because last time we talked about election reform and how it can even be done. And I find it incredibly depressing that you weren't able to do better than you did. I mean, here you're exactly the kind of person I want to see represent me, right? An educated, thoughtful, articulate, kind, personal person who isn't tied to any lobbyist or money or anything. And the fact that doesn't work, even at a local level, is extremely frustrating. And, we've talked about ranked choice voting before and these other solutions. Like, how do we get to the point where we can do that?
But Mike, too, your candidacy was just wrong place, wrong time.
Well, I think I was the wrong candidate too. I mean, I started my candidate. I mean, I didn't have enough money, and I was stubborn about fundraising, and I didn't really have as good of a stories. I mean, I could think of all kinds of reasons why I didn't do very well.
I mean, I remember talking about this where Sharice Davis's her ads were her punching things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Her whole shtick was, I will physically fight for you.
Right. And then you get to the general election and she won't even debate Kevin Yoder. It was just like,
because the debate's irrelevant. The idea doesn't matter. Because Sharice Davis, as a freshman congressman from Kansas, has done what? Exactly nothing. She's an empty vote for the Democratic Party. That's it.
Congressperson, be careful.
I'm sorry. She has no power. She's done nothing. She will continue to do nothing. I mean, the midterms under Trump were simply about who's going to yell the most and who's going to perceive to fight.
And it was right in the middle of the Me Too thing.
Correct.
And so the women vote in Johnson County came out real heavy for Sharice. I mean, that was kind of the block that really pushed her over the top. And there was, I've told the story probably on the pod. I don't know if I had, but if Jason may not have heard it, or even Brandon. But I actually had people in the campaign come up to me and say, Mike, I really love your policies. I think you're a great candidate, but this time I need to vote for a woman. Mm-hmm. And what I wanted to do, and I told Craig the story. I told my wife, I'm like, can I please just turn around and say, can I reflect this back to you and say, you know what? I love your candidate. I think your policies are great, but this time I have to vote for a man. Does that make me sound like a bigot? I
mean, Mike, the intersectional coalition giveth, the intersection coalition taketh away. I mean, if we're playing the intersectional game, you play it when yeah. I mean, this is how the Dems have chosen to put a message together. And in the midterms in 2018, it was all about the right gender. The policy had nothing to do with it, and the perception that you would brawl if needed.
And we did talk about this a lot, and maybe this is a good segue into other things, is that, I worry a lot about how enamored the Democratic Party is with how important diversity is. Now, by the way, I think diversity is incredibly important, but I do think that at times they do push people away because they're just watching for it. Like if you watched the inauguration yesterday, it was a wonderful, diverse set of performers and poets and speakers. It was great. Okay. But if you see the world through a different lens, you see that as people shoving, cancel culture and diversity down your throat. And it's like, well, yeah, that's great, but I live here in this place and there's none of this here. So I just worry sometimes that the party, we need to move forward, but we, like you just said before we started it, you need to figure out a way to do this, but stand off the edges a little bit so that, we can still get some people over from the other side. Because the goal here is not to make the most liberal of liberal Democrats happy. The goal here is to get more people on our side. At least that would be my opinion.
Let's talk about, Jason, what did you think of the inauguration? Let's start there with talking about, we'll start at the inauguration and we'll work our way backwards talking about President Trump. But, I'm assuming that everybody watched the inauguration or seen clips of it. Give me your overall impressions of the event in general.
Overall, definitely felt a sense of relief and optimism for what comes. I did remember commentary that we'd had in the past about what does it look like when there's a sparse crowd and, chain fences and military in the background. What does it look like when it's less populated? We saw flags instead of people around. It felt a little disconnected from that, but overall, relief, optimism, happiness. There were moments in there where I actually kind of felt emotional around it. And I know it's just the baggage of the last year's collecting up to it. But I also wonder if the guy and the team and the administration have so much work in front of them. Like I almost detect a little bit of, all right, this is done. Let's get to it. What's next?
Brandon, have you been to an inauguration before live?
I have not. I wish I have. It's on my bucket list to go at some point. And I have to say, having watched several inaugurations throughout the years, this is probably one I was most excited about, just because of what preceded it. And there was this element that this was such a pivotal and momentous transition for us as collectively in our history. And the sense of normalcy, I think, is just what made it so, it was like breathing a sigh of relief. I think back to 2016 in Trump's inaugural speech, which was dark and about American carnage. He used that line. In fact, I had to go back and look. Apparently George W. Bush at Trump's inauguration said to somebody afterwards, "That's some weird shit that he's saying." Like, and people were speculating probably after this one, he said that's some normal shit, about Biden's inauguration. But it was normal. And I think what was different too is, it was about like the country and who we are. And this whole theme that was wrapped up in it was about, healing, coming together, our better angels. Trump's was all about Trump, I felt like, along with the dark and ominous tone. And this was very opposite in terms of the tone. Down to the very end when Katy Perry was singing and you had that fantastic fireworks display behind the Washington Monument, the Capitol, like that was just unbelievable, because that fireworks display also just invoked all of this symbolism about how, we've seen the worst now. Like this is, the turning of a new page in so many different aspects. So it was different from that perspective. And it was like breathing a sigh of relief.
Brandon, do you think that it won over Republicans? His speech?
I think it won over some. I think that there are many who are going to be intransigent, and those that are in the what I would refer to as Trumplicans are not going to be budging and are not going to see it that way. You have the Fox News set who obviously did not see it in a different light. But I think some it definitely won over, and I think there is a small but critical group of Republicans in the House and Senate that Biden needs if he's going to be effective. And I think that they're are some of those who recognize the moment and who it may have won over. There were a handful of Republicans. I was noting the responses on Twitter and what some Republicans were saying, and you could, it was subtle, but some of the red talk was, this was what we needed. This is, a new leaf. It's and they were recognizing, the momentous day and what it meant. I did see a lot of negativity, and even from, I think, Trump's most ardent supporters in Congress, most of them weren't overly critical at this juncture. That'll probably come on the policy angle. But this is probably, it's going to be a brief honeymoon, but this was Biden's honeymoon, essentially.
What about you, Craig? What did you think?
So I can't be the only one who picked up on that. The Katy Perry thing was a complete troll of Ivanka. The blonde hair, the white suit, the red lipstick.
You're looking hard.
I mean, I'm the only one. Okay, that stuck out to me like a wait.
Was that on Fox News?
No, this is my own conspiracy theory here. So far, Jason, I haven't found anybody that's picking up on this except me. So I think that's really all you need to see. I mean, as far as inaugurations go, I thought it was one of the better ones that I've watched. I thought his tone and his pitch was really, really good. I really liked it that he took a second and actually said, let's have a silent moment of reflection for the 400,000 people that have died from the coronavirus, when Trump has not even mentioned the coronavirus in months. I thought that was an act of true kindness that the country needed.
I had not heard the stat. I think Biden's the one that mentioned in his speech that 400,000 was more than World War I and II combined. That was
that is right.
And we'll be at 500,000 at the end of February.
Yeah. And I might add, actually, the most important moment may have came the night before, Craig, when the president-elect and vice president-elect and their spouses had that ceremony with the markers that were put up by the reflecting pool, because I think that actually set the tone even before Inauguration Day. I mean, that to me spoke volumes, that's saying this is a new administration, this is a new tone, we have a singular focus, this is going to be our number one priority. And we're also going to, for the first time, this has not been done. We have not, as a nation, had a collective moment of remembrance for all of these lives lost, like many other nations have.
And I was surprised that I am usually completely off-put by any mention of religion in a political setting. I found Trump's brush up against the evangelical movement to be completely disgusting. I didn't really mind Biden's religious symbols and overtures in that. I'm Catholic, or at least I was born Catholic, I guess, or raised Catholic. He made the sign of the cross a couple of times. Because it's natural to Biden, I didn't really mind it. I kind of liked that in the presentation, because Biden is what he is. He's a 78-year-old Catholic dude who's been in public service his whole life. And I think he embraces that image. He's not trying to be more than that. And I found that refreshing. But at the same time, like we were talking about before we turned the mics on, there are certain buzzwords and certain triggering mechanisms on the right that I thought he would do a little bit better of avoiding, that he kind of stepped into. And I'll give you the big one, and this is one of my pet peeves too, saying that we have to do something about white supremacy. That is a massively broad statement that can apply to any number of people and have any number of negative connotations to it. If you're going to lead with that, if that's going to be one of the cornerstones, you owe us more of an explanation. What do you mean by white supremacy? Is it white supremacist groups that are gaining in popularity in this country and are becoming a problem? Is that what you're targeting? Are you saying there's a broader definition of white supremacy? How does white supremacy and racism interact? Well, I get it. It was day one. And I get it that, hey, yeah, we got to get our legs underneath us a little bit. There's a lot to shake off from the Trump years. But I just thought that was a little bit of an unforced error that he didn't have to make, that he could have avoided some of that negative punditry talk right out of the bat.
Yeah, it's tricky. You mentioned white supremacy groups. That is kind of a clever way to get out of it. But I do think that he wanted to make some sort of strong statement that we're not going to put up with this kind of crap that we've been having to put up for the last couple
Well,
of
and
years.
he referenced the week before, right? I think that was part of it.
And I'm tired of clever. I have no tolerance for clever. If you have something you want to say it. Say it plainly, say it clearly, tell me what you mean. I'm done with clever. I have no room in my life for anybody trying to be clever.
Well, that you laid down the law on that one, apparently. So, hey, so let me hear what you really want to say. So, Craig, I was reading an article earlier today, and I'm taking you way off your outline now.
You've totally sabotaged the outline tonight, Mike. So go ahead.
No, you led me down. I took you in the cul-de-sac you wanted to go in. So, do you think Biden should pardon Trump?
No, not at all. And I don't know what the
could they find one of the 100 things he did wrong and pardon him for just that thing, and still let him fry on the other stuff, just so that you can say that I pardoned him, and kind of everyone's just saying no.
Because the problem is now that Trump is forever judged in light of the insurrection at the Capitol, and that's become his legacy. So I think that trying to pardon anything small in a way that's looked at as trying to redeem him, and I think for so many people he's not redeemable at this point.
And that would only appeal to a small number now. Anyway, his support level is
that's true.
Tiny.
Well, I saw a news article about it. I thought it was kind of an interesting idea.
So Trump left office with the lowest approval rating of any president since polling has began, and if you look at his career polling as well, while he's been in office, he is the lowest ranked of all the presidents going back to 1950, Eisenhower. So there's just no. I think that at this point Trump's legacy has been defined. And the lawsuits are going to start, and history has rendered its judgment on Trump. And I think it would be a mistake to try to find something. I mean, Biden has enough to tackle, and doing that is it going to, I think, change how Biden is viewed among the far right fringe that adores Trump, because Biden is still seen as a illegitimate president, and that's not going to change, according to people who think the election was stolen.
So, do you think? Because Trump's final legacy is the Capitol attack. One of the things I was talking with one of my friends who has family out in central Kansas, and we were talking about how even some of them are kind of at least listening to Biden now, because they were so profoundly insulted by the Capitol. And like, they were Trump supporters, but they saw the Capitol riot and they're like, oh my God, this is really not good. So they're actually giving they're even giving Biden a little bit of a chance. Do you think there's an opportunity there at this point in time to kind of drift off of that, to kind of bring more people over because his legacy is so tarnished?
Well, to Craig's point, the order of operations that he approaches the next few weeks there is super critical. And so far I'm hearing primarily COVID, right? Which is probably the right thing to approach because that impacts everybody, regardless of race, creed, color, or religion.
Where they live, all that kind of stuff.
What's hard for me we're too close to Trump right now to really kind of understand how history is going to see him. We still have a second trial in the Senate, impeachment trial. And I heard that McConnell's going to ask for a month before the trial starts to run an investigation. I agree with that. This is the United States. Everybody gets due process. You can't hold a trial for somebody and not give them the opportunity to put on a defense. Now, can Trump find a defense team? That's an open question. But I'm under the camp that if we're ever going to move forward, we all have to face it together. And we all collectively have to open the kimono and show our warts and talk about them openly, mete out the punishments that are deserved before we move on. And if we try just to scrape this under the rug, the entire Trump presidency, especially the 2 months since he lost the election, there's absolutely no healing, or there's absolutely no consensus that can be reached. It's just a circular argument about what degree of dickhead is Trump. And I don't think that's going to get us anywhere.
I spoke with someone last weekend who was a Trump supporter and told me that while he thought the Capitol insurrection was deplorable. And I should probably come up with a different word. He didn't use that word. That word's loaded now. He thought that, the punishment and the analysis of who all involved should wait for some measure of months. And I was pretty surprised to hear that, but it also rang to me that there's a pretty significant group of people who are going to take that at any kind of retribution on Trump as a huge negative, and then ignore any positive that's done by by Biden in the administration. So a little bit, if you can play both cards at the same time, great. But I would really focus on the COVID relief and whatever else we're going to do with climate and healthcare and
economy.
Policies right there and aren't enough.
Yeah, there's enough big fights to pick that you don't have to pick Trump's impeachment day one. And it's going to be a big enough battle just getting anything COVID through the Senate. There's also, too, a battle still about what are the rules of the Senate going to be. I've never lived through the 50-50 split, so I don't know how that negotiation happens. But I think they're still arguing about how the Senate's going to function. So if they put off the trial of Trump for a month or so, I can live with that. I think that's still acceptable.
And it doesn't change anything about what happened or what happens next in the next month anyway. So the timing seems less critical there. And we now also know Biden can do a lot through executive action. That first picture of him next to his desk had a stack as tall as my hands can hold of things to sign.
And is that the future of the United States federal government? That every 4 to 8 years,
we just flip-flopping back and forth. The
president sits down with a 2-foot stack of exec orders, and that's how we go. It certainly feels like there's going to be more and more of that.
I wish there was a way. I wish there was a way to legislate that away, because it's really, I think it's, I mean, when your guy's doing it, you love it. But when the other guy's doing it, you hate it. And there's no mechanism for fixing it unless the legislator works.
Yes. There's a whole body of government designed to do it. There's 535 of them. I mean, there's a whole branch of government specifically designed to do this.
Hey, wait a second. I vote for those people, don't I? Is that what you're talking about, Craig?
Maybe. I'm not sure. I mean, if they're not going to do it, what's the alternative? I'm not a fan of the executive order, but if nothing gets done, what are we going to do? Everybody thinks DACA sucks the way it was done. What's the answer? And are we going to sit here and watch another immigration bill go down in flames and tank the first 2 years of Biden's presidency because he's once again going to pick up the DACA sword and try to find a way to charge the castle to get 11 million productive people in this country a path to citizenship that 80% of the country agrees upon?
It would seem like they'd be able to do that now, right?
You're not going to get 60 votes for that. There's no way.
Why do they need 60 votes?
He had a plan to do something with executive action on that. Isn't that one of the 19 things he just signed?
You can't. You
probably read it.
You can't do it through executive action. That's the problem we're in. Is that Obama took an executive action that even at the time he said he didn't have the power to do, and we've been fighting about it ever since because nobody debated it. Anything in this country that happens with the phone and the pen is not a positive thing.
We didn't create the ability to have a king or a monarch, or that seems to be what we're attempting to do every time we give more power to that branch.
Yeah, I just thinking of Trump and looking at his last speech. I think he gave it Thursday, like before he left. He gave a prompter speech. And it was probably the best speech of his presidency. This is where he finally congratulated Biden. He wished the administration well, all of that. It struck me that if Trump throughout his 4 years would have given one of those speeches once a month, not tweeted, and just not acted like a moron, we'd be sitting for the next 4 years with Trump.
Absolutely.
That's all he had to do.
But that's not natural Trump. I mean, when he does that, he's forced to. I mean, if you read the background, I mean, these are his advisors saying you have to do this. It was just like a week ago when he came out and gave his speech before the cameras. It was because his general counsel said you have to do this or you have massive liability now. And so it's only when his hand is forced and that he gives these speeches, and then that the problem is, that people see real Trump versus scripted Trump, and they're two very different people.
I think with the Trump's last day of president, this is me just taking a swipe, but I'm a small petty person, so I'll do it. One, his makeup looked like shit. I mean, it was obvious the makeup person finally said, I am so tired of you. Just like, took a bunch of orange stuff, shot it on a towel, shoved it in his face and said, there, get outside. Because I don't know a lot about makeup, but I have watched a couple makeup videos with my daughter, and the blending down the side was terrible. Second, Melania Trump was the happiest I've ever seen that woman in her life. She literally sprinted to that helicopter. Did you see her when she got off the plane in Florida? Trump, there was a microphone. He stopped, reached for her hand. She was 15 yards down the road. She was like, I am done. This 4-year prison sentence has ended, and you will never see me again.
Is she heading out to the divorce attorney too? Is that what you're saying? That's where she was heading?
That's prearranged. Why get divorced? That seems, again, I hate to say it, but Trump's 74. He's not in the great shape. Just do it the natural way.
Hold out.
And she has a really good prenup too. I mean, she has spent a lot of time making that ironclad, so she's going to be set.
Well, the rumor was they had to add to it when he became president.
Yeah.
Because she's like, I do not want to do this.
You remember there was like several weeks before she actually arrived in the White House that she was holed up in Trump Tower in New York City because they were working on the prenup, and the lawyers were going back and forth. And so there was like a 2 or 3 week period where she was with Barron in New York, and she wasn't going to go to the White House until that prenup, was to her satisfaction. So that's
my favorite meme is the Home Alone one where they forget Barron at the White House after they leave, and he like slaps her face and yells Barron. Brandon knows what I'm talking about.
I've seen that one. That's a good one.
You guys don't hang out on Twitter enough. So as we're coming up on an hour, and Mike's blowed up our
no, it's 40. It's only 42 minutes. So, I can now watch this recording, and I'm feeling really good about it.
Oh my God, you would have freaked out in the early days because we hit 15 minutes, and Mike would he would just start gyrating and just tapping at the
I was like looking at my watch, no one's going to listen to this thing for more than 15 minutes. What are you doing? This is going on forever.
Jason, now that we've got a small degree of separation from Trump, I know we don't have enough yet. And again, I agree with you that when the shield of the presidency is dropped from him, it's going to be a whole new world come his way very quickly. How are you beginning to process your thoughts on what was the Trump presidency? Was it what you thought it would be? Was it worse? Was it better? If you had to kind of, in 100, you step into a time machine, and 200 years from now, you have to explain to people 2016 to 2020 politically and the Trump presidency. How do you think you'd go about doing that?
That's a tough one. I mean, part of me thinks it was worse than I expected, but if I went back and saw him debating people on stage at the same time, news clips come out on Access Hollywood, and knowing his history and knowing his lack of morals, and just being shocked every time he recovered from anything terrible that came out about him, maybe we shouldn't have been too surprised. The guy always said what he wanted to do. He was very clear up front what his opinions were, what his biases were, and we saw those play out almost like a slow train wreck over 4 years. So I think I'd go back and tell everybody, you're going to get what you asked for.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of Trump's superpowers. He didn't hide the ball. He wasn't trying to trick anybody. He wasn't some Machiavellian genius working some Ford chess D, whatever he used to say. He just was a guy who just kind of flung it every day, shot from the hip, and did what he did. But same question to you, Brandon. Is this, you've seen a lot of politicians up close, and you've seen people, at the federal level, high up in the federal level, how they work, how they react. What's your kind of 48-hour reaction post-Trump presidency to what happened the last 4 years?
Well, I think back to when Republicans were in focus groups, Republicans that supported Trump were asked why. They said they wanted somebody who was an outsider who would blow up the system. It was that mentality that the system is broken and we just need someone to go in there and blow it up. And that's what he did. I mean, he was the chaos president, and we had 4 years of chaos. His White House was a revolving door of hucksters and grifters and malcontents. And he exemplified incompetence at the highest levels. And then he appointed people to positions of power and authority throughout the federal government who exemplified that incompetence. And so we lived on a daily basis of just chaos and not knowing what policy was going to be handed down from one moment to the next, and whether or not he would change his mind, as he was apt to do frequently when it came to policy. So it created plenty of problems in terms of setting expectations for domestic policy, but also international policy, because our allies and friends around the world had no idea what to expect from us, and they couldn't count on us for anything. So I would say he's the chaos president. He was elected to blow up the system, and he did. And the system now is just in shatters. And, Biden's greatest challenge is going to be fixing this federal government that has just been depleted completely of career civil servants, people that should be there. And this gets into a little bit into the weeds, but a little known action that Trump took back in October was he made it easier for political hacks to burrow within the federal bureaucracy and get civil servant positions where it would be difficult for them to get fired, while simultaneously making it easier to fire career civil servants for any reason. And so Biden is also confronted with the hundreds of Trump loyalists who are now within the federal government at different levels who may try to sabotage his agenda. So that's another aspect.
I'm super curious to hear what the other two of you have to say. But while Brandon's on the mic, you had mentioned the system a few times. In the last couple of times, I think we referenced the institutions and whether or not the institutions held. It sounds like you're sort of saying overall the institutions held. However, we saw tons of cracks in the foundations, and now we don't maybe even know how deep those cracks go. But there has to be a lot of repair that's done. Do you think one of the lessons that comes out of this is something that has to be foundationally corrected so that kind of damage to the system or the institutions can't happen again?
I would say yes. I'm sorry to interject the correct, but there's, I think, a lot of foundational repair that has to happen. And we have to look at laws that I think better define the roles of different individuals within these agencies throughout the federal government, what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. A perfect example is the GSA administrator withholding the transition documents from the Biden team. She shouldn't be able to do that after an election where we have a president-elect. And so she was able to, at her discretion, do that to appease Trump. But we need to firm something like that up so if this ever happens again, that the government and the peaceful transition of power is able to function as it should without having these roadblocks.
I think the best analogy that I've heard is that we learned the bones are strong, but it's the cartilage that holds them together where the weakness lies. And the bones are the big institutions, the immovable objects, the things that are so ingrained in our politic that they can't move. But we also learned that those systems are linked together, sometimes by one individual person. And we're really, really lucky that 3 people in Georgia and a few people in Pennsylvania and a couple in Nevada, a handful of people held that bridge together.
So and I think in Michigan, I mean, you had one person on the canvassing board in Michigan, which was the defining vote to ensure that there was a chaos. And that's.
So I like that analogy in that the institutions are strong. When you're inside the institution, there is strength, but there's these connecting points that are extremely vulnerable. And I agree, Brandon. We've got to go through, and this has to be on a state by state basis. We've got to put the work in to shear some of that up. And I don't know what that looks like. That can't happen at the federal level. I mean, if anybody after this experience is calling for more federal control over elections, you're high. You're just not paying attention. So how do you get 50 states, or how many ever of these states have these? How do you identify the states that have issues, and how do you go about doing it in this distributed environment? I don't know how to do that.
You almost need like a national democracy integrity project or an organization who's willing to, that, you have people who hear about this, fund it, and they're the ones who work state by state with those local state elected officials as well as other players within the state to craft laws that basically bolster the election process and ensure that it can't be hijacked. And that's really what you need. Because it's not, you need an organization that's willing to define time, money, and attention to it and work at this local level, state by state.
And you really have to have an organization that is, without question, nonpartisan. Because so much of the movement, at least the people I've seen, the Democratic Party, that are all about, voting rights, it's more about, increasing the number of, trying to find ways to increase the vote so that it helps the Democratic Party. It's not always a pure altruistic, nonpartisan effort to ensure democracy.
Let's maybe end with this. So, Mike, to me, the truth was the biggest victim of the Trump presidency. Where does the truth play in our politics moving forward? What role do facts and truth have as we try to dig out of the hole we're in?
You should have teed me up for a seriously ethical, or not ethical, but philosophical question like that. I think this. I'm going to answer kind of, because it kind of feeds back into the comment you made just a minute ago about the institutions are good, but the what was the physical metaphor you used? What was it?
Bones are solid. It's the cartilage that's
cartilage. That's what it was. I think
part of my storytelling ethos there, Mike.
You're a pro at this, and I'm still an amateur. So, I think to me, at the end of the day, all these systems were designed assuming that people were going to act in an ethical way. And because people are not acting in an ethical way, that's why these things are not working. And I think that that's part of the problem with the news. I thought we'd get to this, but to me, Trump is the product of the reality TV kind of genre, if you will, and it plays out on reality television, and it plays well on TV, and it really is great for social media. And if we don't fix those things, we're going to get another one, just like Trump, if not worse. In fact, actually, if we get someone who has, half a brain, it's going to be a lot worse. We always talked about how, policy-wise, Pence is probably, similar to Trump, but at least he's a calculating politician, whereas Trump was just a total loose cannon. So, to me, I think the things we're going to have to do, I worry about the next 4 years that if we don't fix social media, and I'm not going to call it big tech because I think that's kind of unfair. We're going to have a big problem. And I know I have a lot of my friends that are celebrating the fact that AWS pulled them out on the Parler, which I thought was classic. And thanks, Jason. I listened to that Minute Pod too. But we love it because the censors are on our side. If the censors were not on our side, we would not have liked that move. So, right?
Yes, I'm so glad that you said that. Remember, censor's great when it's your side, but the pen will come for you eventually.
Exactly. So, but we need to sort that out. And, I've been thinking about that for a couple of years. And I even tried to make tech and some of these things, about our privacy and all that kind of a campaign issue. And no one cared, because it's not as important. And it's certainly not as important today as COVID or getting the economy back online. But if we don't fix some of those problems and the news, the Fairness Act, some of those things, we're just kind of leaving it open. We're leaving the door open for another 4 years of someone like Trump. And that worries me a lot.
Jason, can the truth gain traction? Can the truth become popular again without stepping on somebody's First Amendment rights? Can we reestablish the position truth needs to have in our conversation without a little censorship? Do we have to accept one to get the other? Jason, I think you're muted, Jason.
I don't know if he is. He was thinking there for a minute.
Sorry.
No, he was thinking, and then I saw it, and then it's like, okay.
All right. So first, I don't think it's censorship if you agreed to a policy of a site you're using that was published ahead of time, and you.
I completely agree. I could trust me. I've been the biggest advocate. Like, Facebook doesn't owe anybody an account. Like, you're on their platform, and if they don't like you, it doesn't matter. They don't even need to tell you. They can just turn your account off. I'm completely on board with that.
Well, and so I guess to the argument there of like if it was on some site I agreed with more than what Trump was doing, would I be upset? And my response would be, was it a violation of the policy of the site I agreed to? Because that's sort of the trust you enter in with a social media site like that. But I'm going to reference back to Brandon's last minute pod, because I thought one of the more depressing pieces that I picked up from that was he was referring to conversations that he'd had, debates with people where he would present facts to them and try to counter the mistruths that they'd heard somewhere else. And by the end of the argument or the end of the debate, they would just throw up their arms and say, well, what can you believe anyway? And so here's an example where he's spoken to multiple people and presented them with facts that are backed up, that can be found from more than one source, researched, whatever, and they don't accept it. And so if it's counter to the narrative that they wanted to believe going into the conversation in the first place, they're not going to accept it. If that's the place we're in, censorship doesn't even matter at that point. And that's what's scary, because now it's not just talking about facts or fiction. It's wholly in the ears of the listener, whether they want to believe it or not.
I mean, that's what gaslighting is, right? And so I think, if you're going to be very cynical, you could say that some of these outlets and personalities on these fringe publications, their goal is to get Americans to eventually just question everything and throw up their hands and say, well, I don't know what to believe. Who knows what the truth really is? And then they've accomplished what they set out to do. Because if they can get Americans to have that mindset where they eventually don't know what to believe and they believe nothing, that's just as disastrous for our democracy as anything else. And I'm running across more and more people that have that reaction when they're confronted with facts. And it's the ultimate in terms of being gaslit. And, it's interesting, too, because we're at a point where this isn't going away. I mean, you have millions of Americans that still believe in this alternate reality of a stolen election. As a country, I don't see that we're going to adhere to a common set of shared facts anytime soon. That's going to continue to be a problem. And we can play whack-a-mole, right? And maybe QAnon goes away and just disintegrates, but there will be something else that comes in its place. There will be other conspiracy theories and outlets that propagate this notion of a deep state or this global conspiracy that's undermining average citizens. And we know already that millions of Americans are susceptible to that, and that susceptibility isn't going away either. There was a poll out that I thought was very striking after the insurrection, where Americans were asked to rank in priority order what they thought was the gravest threat to our country. This included hostile foreign adversaries, the economy, COVID. Number one on that list, 54% of Americans said the greatest threat to America is fellow Americans. That's where we're at now.
I was not expecting you to say that. I thought it was going to be something else, but yeah. What shocked me over the last couple of days is Lindsey Graham came out yesterday and said, boy, he sure hopes Donald Trump's the leader of the Republican Party. Boy, he sure hopes that they don't move forward without him as the leader. Kevin McCarthy said today that he felt Trump still had a place in the Democratic or in the Republican Party and still felt Trump could be the leader of the Republican Party. So, Mike, is it are the are what the Republicans saying is that they have officially adopted Trump's America First policy. And they're just looking for somebody who's just a little bit better than Trump to deliver it. I guess is Trump's lasting legacy is that he's changed conservatism and he's changed the Republican Party. The definition of what it means to be conservative is not what it was 4 years ago. And if the Republicans still feel Trump is a viable leader, what does that say about the party?
Well, it's better to ask Brandon this question because he's closer to it. But I think I don't know what's going to happen. I thought about it a lot. Is there going to be the Trump party? Some third party that's going to come out of this. I have to hope. Well, I was hoping 4 years ago that the Republicans would start disenfranchising, would kind of move away from Trump, and they just never did. Now, of course, the good news is you can look at Georgia. Oops, that didn't really help. And there's a lot of other examples of candidates that got close to Trump that they kind of incinerated. So I'm hoping that someone's doing some math in DC to say, it's not good to stand too close to this guy because you're going to get burned. Brendan, you're shaking your head no. Do you think that's not what's going to happen, or?
Sorry, Mike. No, I agree with you. I was shaking my head, actually, not in disagreement, but just at the prospect that Republicans would continue to hold on to Trump as a standard bearer, because I do think that's not sustainable. We've seen that that's not sustainable. It's when you have your party lose a second term in the White House and lose control of the Senate and not have control of the House for the first time since 1929, like that's a problem. And there is no redeeming value in holding on to Trump. And so they have to be forced into making a choice. Do they remain the Trump party and continue to bleed traditional Republicans and moderates and centrists and lose states, permanently, like Georgia, which is turning blue, in Arizona? That this is happening partially due to demographics, but it's also happening because suburbanites don't want to be associated with the party of Trump. And so,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just the change is either, and Trump has teased at creating his own political party called the Patriot Party or what have you. So either that's going to happen, and some of these folks are going to be splintered and they're going to leave the coalition and go to that party, or the Republican Party is going to remain the Trump party with a different face and name, someone who's nationalist populist takes on the Trump mantle, and they're going to bleed traditional Republicans. But they can't keep both in that coalition. I don't see a place where you have Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and have Mitt Romney. And Ben Sasse. That can't sustain itself.
So two quick things. So one, did you see, Brendan, the statistic, and Jason, you're also in Johnson County. I think I saw the last election cycle was the first time in over 100 years that Johnson County voted for a Republican for president.
Since 1916, Woodrow Wilson. Yeah. Very remarkable.
Yeah, which goes to the suburban kind of trying to stand away. And then the second question I'll ask Craig. So we have this kind of potential fracturing of the Republican Party because you got the Trump, kind of crazy conservatives and then kind of the more mainstream. Is that similar to the progressives and the Democrats, or do you think that or why are they able to get along and maybe the Republicans won't be able to make that work, that coalition?
So in the last Batman movie, in the Heath Ledger Batman movie.
Where is this going?
Hold on. Storyteller, Mike. Okay. There's a great scene between Michael Caine, who plays Alfred, and Batman. And Batman is trying to figure out why are all these criminals following the Joker? He's obviously insane. Why are these people going along with him? And Michael Caine looks at Batman and he says, you push these people to the point of desperation. And in their desperation, they turn to a man they didn't understand. That's the Republican Party. They got pushed to the point of desperation by Barack Obama and this multicultural coalition that was supposed to be unbeatable. And at the time in 2012, when they ran the most traditional Republican they could, and he lost, and it wasn't even close, they turned to somebody in their desperation that they didn't understand. And that man was Trump. And 4 years later, it's the ending scene of Batman where the Joker's blown up the entire city. So this is blown up in their face because they don't know who or what they are. All they know is that it's slipping away from them year after year. The demographics are changing, the country's changing, and they don't have anybody who can shine a light kind of on a path for them to get through this.
I remember you saying, even before we started the podcast, you kept saying this is the white man's last stand is what you used to kept calling.
I told everybody at work, this is old man Whitey's last power grab. And if you think we're going to give it up, you will pry it out of my cold, old, dead hand. That's how power works. You take power. It's not given. It's just the Republicans have got themselves in a spot where they've attached themselves to somebody.
The Joker.
Okay. A mechanism of destruction. It blew up in their face. Now they're trying to figure out, how do we distance ourselves from this? Half of them want to jettison this guy, half don't. I'll end this rant with this, Mike. The problem with the Republican Party is it will split apart. But the problem is the people they're going to kick out is Liz Cheney, Ben Sasse, and Mitt Romney. They're going to keep on purpose Marjorie Greene and Mo Brooks and that other stupid ass from Colorado, Laura. I keep wanting to call her Lorena.
Yeah.
See, my son lives in Colorado, and he was telling us last night that she owns like a diner or something, and she insists that like her staff concealed carry. Like, what is that?
Yeah, she requires it. Yeah, to work there.
Yeah, exactly. It's a requirement to be an employee.
This iteration of the Republican Party is so lost. They still want Donald Trump to be their leader, and they would pick those three loon bags over established, sensible Republican leaders.
Well, because they've become an identitarian party, right? So they, have become everything that they hate and despise, and they've criticized the Democrats for plain identity politics, and then they've chosen to become a party that's completely based on one personality, one figure, and based on identity and victimhood and grievance. And the problem is they're not a party based on issues anymore. And it was Senator John Thune, who I've now quoted many times, who said, we need to get back to being a party based on ideas and not a party that's attached to one person. But I don't see that happening. I mean, and the problem is you already have, speaking of cancel culture, you have Republicans like Liz Cheney, who they're trying to take her leadership role away as a House conference chair. You have the Arizona GOP, which is passing resolutions against Cindy McCain, Governor Doug Ducey, a host of figures. So all of these people, the Georgia governor, Georgia Secretary of State, who just upheld their duties, Republicans are looking to punish in some way or another. So again, that's fracturing. It's going to happen because you still have a segment of the population, the base, that's frustrated, and they see these people as the enemy because they kept Trump from another term. And so they're going to find ways to ostracize them and exclude them and punish them.
Can we end on a happy note? Craig, do you have a good story? I mean, you went to this kind of like Joker place, and can we go? I mean, can we end on a high note? Do you have something of levity to kind of add here?
Mike, you've known me enough. If you're looking for positive affirmation, not going to happen here. Jason, I want to kick that question to you because I think you probably have the most optimistic outlook. If we needed to find something positive this week, what would it be?
Well, the chef's kiss here would be to change the chapter art to show a Bernie meme.
Oh, we could go there. What did you think of the poet? What was her name? Was that girl's name Amanda? Is that right?
I thought she was outstanding. I can't believe that
only
young
20 years old.
Wow. Yeah, she's incredible. Yeah, I don't see how anybody could look at that and and try to take a shit on that. I thought it was.
I can imagine people. I can absolutely.
They have. I just, if you're doing that, the problem is you, not her.
I mean, that poem was like the message for the moment. I mean, it was everything that needed to be said, and I felt like. And you can go back to Maya Angelou, other poet laureates and poets who have read it at inaugurations, who have given stirring words. But I don't think there was any poem that met the moment as much as hers did. I mean, if you read it, and I've reread it.
I think it was her words, it was the delivery, and then the person who delivered it. And seeing that from a person, a youthful person, to see that even someone in her condition would still have hope, I think is to me the story that I took from that. And it was a hopeful day. So I hope that the party is inclusive and tries to make sure that we include all of America in the agenda, or we're going to be having this battle again. We'll see how much discipline. I want to believe that Biden and his handlers are going to be smart enough to not go off the rails. But we'll see where it goes. I mean, the problem is we just can't predict what, Tucker Carlson's going to put on the news and have, the uninformed masses on Fox, be listening to the untruth.
Mike, we'll break the fourth wall here. Nobody closed their browser after we signed off to make sure we save all the files. We had a scare last time, so I just wanted to say that while I'm looking at everybody. I'll end on something positive, Mike. It was positive having you here tonight.
Oh,
I really like you to do more of these. You have a.
And for those at home don't know, we haven't had, knock on wood, any COVID in our family. And my wife still is a cancer survivor. She's halfway through her vaccination regimen. We still haven't, we've only gone out to eat, I think 3 times since this whole thing started. So we're still kind of taking it, pretty close. So thanks everyone on the pod today for doing this remotely. Kind of allowed me to participate. Otherwise I was going to have to skip again.
And I want to plug Brandon's Minute Pod that posted this week. I've had a couple of people text me tonight that listened to it. I think it's excellent. Brandon, you did a great job with that. The 3 pillars of Trump's army. It's really good information put together in a really good way. And I thought that was really well done. And I think everybody who listens to this podcast would really enjoy that.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's our hour. Thanks, guys.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.